Okay, e mihi kawana kia tātou, kua hui hui mai nei kiko nei a tinana, me kia koutou kua hui I runga I te kari o ngā rangi I te ipurangi. Tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. So, I'm guessing at least some of you have probably seen me wittering away on the YouTube video with some of my thoughts about things. But the reason for gathering this is not actually to hear loads and loads from me, it's more to hear from all of you around your thoughts about what we can do that means that we function well as a place of worship, both for those who are here already, but of course always thinking about those who are not here. And that is the larger part of ngā iwi Māori, not found, not in this church, but not in any church on a Sunday. And the worship service is only part of how we reach them. I thought I'd just mention one thing here, which is, Rosemary, it's lovely to see you here. And you know what we were talking about earlier in the week around, for example, te mahurehure, how can we serve that marae? And I'd love us to think about how we can serve a number of marae in terms of that's how going out of the doors, and service is the prelude then to being able to, if we're invited to have the opportunity to speak and to share the gospel in that sense. So that I don't want to pretend that the worship service is the only thing, but it is an important thing. And if people come in or are looking at it and then thinking about, well, could I imagine myself here? That's where I think especially if we're able to hear from those who have a background that's a bit different about what is it that you love? What actually captured you about Te Mihana, Te Anatapu and the karakia here, but also what do you think are things that might be barriers to people, and can we create something that's coherent? And this is the last bit that I'm going to say now. I think a key part of that is that people probably do need some different options. It's very hard in our current cultural setting where people are formed, even in the Māori world, are formed in quite different spaces within the Māori world for one thing to work well for everybody. And I think if we go back to the start of Matatini and Tā Kingi's day, there probably was a greater coherence than there is now amongst the wider world. Or possibly he was just such a person who was able to create that coherence and win people in. And maybe that's also part of it in terms of his leadership. But I think there's a slightly different context now that we're trying to work into. So one of you might be that person of his stature who can make that work, or it may well be that we're thinking about different options here. But yeah, I know a number of you thought very deeply about this. And have also served very faithfully. So some people for many, many years, Ngarangi, David, Shona and Adam, and quite a few other people have been here for a very, very long time. And so I just want to acknowledge the faithfulness that's been there and that's still there. And there's nothing that we want to do that would disrupt people who are here. And at the same time as well, there's also other people who have come in newer and with fresh eyes that helps to see things in a different way. So kia ora tātou, open up the space. I have no set agenda for how we're to try and talk things through. I'm very, very eager to hear from people as much as we can. And of course, this feeds into then the setting for the new missioner as well. Kia ora. And I think these microphones are helping people on the live stream. So, is it better if people come up here? Yep. Yep. Yeah, so hopefully the discussion is picked up as well, but for clarity, we can go to the microphone. That will help. Oh, oti.
Kia ora everyone. I think in terms of our 10:30 service, I think we've been doing pretty well. considering kind of maybe 4 or 5 years ago when we started here, me and Nia felt like a lot of the whānau here really wanted to see more young adults, more young people, more children, more tamariki. And so we kind of set out to kind of do a few things, and with the support of other leaders like Scott and Te Karere and others, to go about this in an organic way as possible. And so I think I'd like to acknowledge the team. When our missioner moved on to the Tikanga Pākehā Church, you know, a lot of us kind of stood in the gap, and not just the young adults, our older whānau too, and yeah, I mean, in general, I'm pretty pleased with the way things are growing. I think there's a lot of potential in this place. I think lots of people can see the potential, and so for me, to be honest, a big focus needs to happen. I think the service stuff is getting there to a point, like where we're nearly getting there to a point where it's really good, but there's just gaps that I'm more concerned about, like children's ministry, rangatahi, because that stuff's the future of our church. And also, as we grow, we have to grow in our infrastructure. If we have more families coming in, you know, how are we connecting with them in the community? So around the service stuff, I quite enjoyed kind of today's service was awesome. Be cool to get it a bit shorter like we used to have it before, but nothing's perfect. But yeah, I mean, it's good seeing like our young people up, you know, just to get to this point, there was some massive barriers. Just to get to doing them and having our young adult community engaged in the service was a journey in itself. So that's all I got to say. I might come back up later if someone says something I don't like. I don't know. Kia ora.
Kia ora whānau. I have come to realise over the last couple of years that I'm probably an outlier in terms of why I'm here, compared to, say, other people who might be in their mid-30s with kids who have a Christian background or whatever. But a part of what I will say, and my journey here has been around the way this place has transformed my faith and helped me to engage with God, and that's for a whole bunch of different reasons, but the container of liturgy has been able to hold Te Reo Māori, which is one of my great passions. And so the liturgy and the depth of the Māori has had me praying and hearing from God in the Māori language, which has been far more important than probably the nature of the service. And so I am not the demographic that you want coming in, because you probably, you know, the average Māori maybe isn't as maroke or contemplative or whatever as I am. They might be passionate about Te Reo Māori, that's probably the only connection point. So personally, I enjoy the in-between service. Is it contemporary? Not really. Is it traditional? Not really. I'm like, wow, I don't fit into those boxes either. But regardless of what I enjoy at the moment, I am less concerned around the form that we take and more concerned around the quality of language and our commitment to language. Te Reo Māori as the kauwaka wairua, or the spiritual medium in which the Holy Spirit speaks to us, is the thing that I'm the most interested in. And my nervousness around large amounts of change is the inability for us to carry that change within the medium of Te Reo Māori. And so, if for me, the distinctive factor of Te Hahi Mihinare is its, tōna kaha ki te noho pū mau Te Reo Māori, then as soon as we have different voices, different whakaaro coming through, and a container which isn't liturgically based, then actually all the reo will fly out the window. And I know that to be true in some of the other kind of more contemporary expressions that I've seen, because that's the first thing to go when we try something different, because people draw from those different contexts, especially Pentecostal backgrounds, which often aren't based in tikanga o reo Māori. So I'm just the most passionate around us praising and listening to God within the medium of Te Reo Māori. I am open to different forms of change. I'm just nervous that as we change the container away from the structured liturgy, that we won't have the cultural capacity to actually do things well in the language. And so I'm just the most passionate about that above all things. Outside of that, I wonder what it looks like for us to continue to make our services relevant to Te Iwi Māori, but not to be a carbon copy of what already exists. If someone would rather go to a context like Destiny, then we should support them in their, if that's where they really feel at home and that's the expression that they want. And so maybe one of the questions are, who are the people that might be interested in what we might have to say and offer out of the hundreds of thousands of Māori that live in Tāmaki, and how might we serve their needs. And so I think Te Reo Māori is one of the distinctive factors there. The other thing I think is, once again, I'm not opposed to change, but I think we need the ability to manage that change and the people who are coming into the spaces as well. For example, this year you'll likely see Wilson, Esther, we just saw Scott, Tumanako, Sean, all of those people step into kai karakia roles. And so what are they stepping into? We just need to make sure that any change is accompanied by really good support and training. That's all I have to say. So I'm not opposed to change. Personally, I really like what we're doing at the moment, but that's unhelpful because I'm not the target market, am I? So in some ways that opinion is void, but what's our distinctive factor? I think it's Te Reo Māori as the medium, te waka huia o tō mātou nei whakapono, and I think that is a thing which is, it's transformed my faith. And I think it's something that we will have to offer that other churches might not. So that's all I have to say.
Kia ora koutou whānau. Reason why we're here today is because we heard there was a lunch on. No, not really. But one of the things that I wrestle with is this sense of who we are as Māori, but also our Christian faith. How do we link the two with the niche target that we're trying to reach, eh? When I took over Rokatapu, thanks to Mata Linden here, I wrestled because I said to Mata Linden, what is the minimal thing I can do and yet still be tika to Hahi Mihinare? So that was my journey last year. It sort of evolved along the way, eh? And we come here today to actually find out our middle ground, because I could actually swing right on this side in terms of the contemporaryism, or stay right here and journey in this area of traditional liturgy. And I recall the very reason why I came into this space. Yes, there's the work to do, but Te Karere, you hit it on the nose, brother. It's just a sense of liturgy and the reo. There's a richness there that I've found along the way that I would, like yourself, not so phased about the form, but actually to be true in tika to those who've gone before us in terms of the liturgy and tradition. But it's a fine act to play, eh? And I want to thank my brother Edu. We were having a cup of tea and just sitting around the table there, and we were just brainstorming, and the kōrero was the sense of vision. What is our vision as a church? What does it look like? How are we to walk in it? Because this is only a representation of the wider Te Takiwā Manukau. And what goes on here will flow out to the other churches. And thank God, because we need that to happen for growth to come. So that was my wrestle. How does it look like? What does it look like? Definitely there is a niche market that only a few selected will come into this space. And we can't keep on hiring and bringing more people. They've got to really want to actually be part of what we're doing here. And the challenge for us is, how do we make it relevant, still staying true to what we hold as so dear? So these are the wrestle, these are things that I hold even in Rukatapu. When I see the faithful few flock turn up, I think, wow, they only come for one reason. Hopefully that's for Jesus. But there's this whakawhanaungatanga of whānau, te reo, the liturgy, all intertwined, fused together. But what I'm sensing that also, in our whare kareke, is a sense of wairua tapu. And there was a sense of God's anointing, wairua, in this place, which I believe there is. People will catch it, eh? People will catch it before they even heard it. They'll catch it because of who we are. You and I carry a message of hope, of life and freedom, even in the confines we find ourselves in. And as we step into these spaces, I pray that we will continue to be the light, not a flickering, dimmering light, but God will reflect and shine through us. Because I think all of us have right through the Tekiwā, right through to Mihana, we all have a part to play in seeing our people come into the house. I think also there's a shift. We can't actually wait for our people to come. We've actually got to be intentional. All of us are missioners. All of us evangelists, pastors, priests, apostles, teachers, a whole lot of us. We have the fivefold ministry right within this very room, and at different parts we play in it. And it's up for us to lead that by example, eh? So yeah, this is just a tau kume moment I'm wrestling with in terms of what we do in Rukatapu, but I'm excited. I'm excited for what's ahead of us. Kia ora whānau. Oops.
Kia ora e te whānau. I came with written notes. My wife and I actually talked last night and put our whakaaro together, particularly because this is a place we deeply care about. I'm going to bounce off what Te Karere had spoken about, that Te Mihana Māori is one of the few contexts where people can assume things about our āhua. And one of those things is that it is a Māori Anglican church. And one way of embodying that, ka rere te reo. It's wonderful to hear. It was at the back there. It was a luxury to be at the back to see some of the people from Matatini, a couple of judges come through who know, ka hara mai koe ki konei, ka rongo I tō reo, e pātere mai ana I konei. And I think that's a wonderful sign for what current Māori believe of us. And it's also an opportunity for what we would want others to believe of us as well. But to bounce off that whakaaro, I'm not just going to focus so much on the reo. I think what's also important is actually being kauaka, is being the medium of Māori context, not only by speaking Māori or thinking Māori, but also being Māori. There are multiple people that I think of who did this wonderfully well. You only have to just stand over by the whakahua and the wharekai, And you'll see a whole bunch of the missioners there who were able to do that. Likes of Kingi, likes of Māori Marsden, Bishop Kito, heaps of them. You just need to stand there and look at the artwork to figure out these are some of the people that have gone before us and are still with us, who have tried to be the kauaka, the medium of these quite different spaces of being both Māori and Christian. 2050 is really close. Now, 2050 is an important year to consider because if we continue with the way that climate change is going, I'm unsure whether we're going to worship inside. It might be just a little bit too hot. So there are real opportunities here, other than just considering our inside worship, of thinking, what does an online service look like as well, considering the current climate at the moment. Anyway, here are some of my whakaaro about some of the changes and some of the affirmations of what we're already doing now. The first thing we would love to see is children involvement, tamariki involvement. I'm not so much distracted by the screams and the moans of kids, to be honest. I'm also concerned about the mums of the kids who can no longer hear what's going on because their kid is speaking and screaming. So something I believe needs to be done there to communicate and reiterate what was said before. Ko ngā tamariki o te nāia nei, te hāhi o a pōpō. And one way we can actually show that we care about that is doing something about that. So here, just for the movement of mine and my wife's kōrero, I said, let's talk macro level first. Let's talk about hopes, dreams, longings, and then we'll go into the micro next, where we action some of that. So here are just some whakaaro. Children could hand out the offertory bags, monthly family services to read from the kids' Bible and preach to the likes of tamariki of the ages of Mahina and Hinewai. We like children being at the back within the whare karakia. However, there should be a program for those kids that don't want to be in the room because they just find it boring. Secondly, for te reo Māori to be spoken, liturgy to be in Māori, for mihi to remain, a key focus for kai karakia to believe in what they are saying. Awesome, we've got te reo Māori in our liturgy, but honestly, there are some kai karakia that I've come past in the last 5 years where I have literally heard them say, ka roria ki te atua. Ko wai e whakahihi tērā. Like honestly, what type of pride exudes out of our ngākau if we're hearing someone who's just about 2 seconds away from dying and saying, ka roria ki te atua. So in saying, I would hope these kauaka that come through here not only say things in te reo Māori, but believe the heck in what they're saying in Māori. At the same time, you're way more convincing if you truly embody what you believe by your reo, by your āhua. Just some comments. I love Eucharist, the way that it is in liturgy, and I just, me mautonu. Yep, next. Collars in, robes out. Pono, for contemporary services especially, I just think. I love the collars, particularly in contemporary services, because there is a certain saltiness to, or the distinctiveness of the way in which leadership is passed around. It's also a sign of, man, who is the person that is commanding me where to go, or who kind of knows the people here? These are soft signs where you don't have to communicate, but it's your kākahu that communicate to the world. However, it's important to note though, especially for the, some of the woke Māori that believe just out with the robes because that's more Pākehā. Here's another whakaaro. And I talked to Scotty about this a couple of years ago. There's a book that is written by Te Mātorohanga called Te Kauwairunga Te Kauwairaro. And in there is this Wairarapa rangatira, where the scribe is describing the whare wānanga down in Wairarapa. Now before these young pia, these young tohunga, walk into the whare wānanga, they were told, me kia unuhia o kākahu. Let go of all of your common kākahu. After they were standing there naked, they were equipped with a korowai. And that was their entrance point to take in esoteric knowledge of the whare wānanga. So I want to say that especially within te tai rāwhiti whare wānanga, that there is a distinctiveness in kākahu that's in some of our whakapapa. Namely, in korowai, because there is a sense that in what you wear, it informs what you should do and how you should think. I mean, you know this. There's a few reasons why male Māori of today get in pants before they're a kai kōrero, so you don't get told off from your kuia. It's the way of communicating that I care so much about this kākahu, about this kaupapa. My kākahu will reflect the mana of this kaupapa as we speak. So just to say, kākahu and its distinctiveness, it is in our whakapapa and it does belong. But in the 10:30 service, hold the collars, out with the robes. These are just some last questions that we thought of, and two had already noted this. How are new people connected in? And then secondly, and perhaps more importantly, what happens with discipleship? Hi, kia ora.
Kia ora, tēnā koutou katoa. As you were, Neihana and Te Karere were speaking, before that I was thinking that sometimes we have to speak for things that can't speak, exactly like you said, for the ocean, for the maunga, for the land, the whenua. And so one of the aspects, I suppose, that comes upon me is that this place has always been a place of justice and relevance, and I think with both Sir Kingi and with Hone, that whole aspect of being relevant to the community that we live in, because the university is close. So we are thinkers. So it's not about where is the market, because I think we need deep thinkers. We need the theologians that can actually argue these things and discuss. And so there also needs to be that space that, for me, Murray Tom is one of our friends, and he did a sermon once, what about the other 6 days? And I think the 7th day, this Sabbath, will do itself. So I think the kupu and all of that being together is an important aspect, and how that might include kapahaka or aspects of matatini. I think we're just missing the point. That maybe in our previous generations, Kingi, of course, Dad didn't include it in, did he? He didn't want to bring the kapahaka into the church, or didn't want to bring the actions into the church. But maybe that's changed. Maybe that's what we need to do. Funny thing is he was the driver for the first Polynesian festival. Then there was Doug Hauraki, I didn't realise, but he took it over from 93 through to 2000, again a St. Stephen's boy, and now Selwyn Parata. So you've got these 3 Anglicans that have driven this kapahaka process, but we seem to exclude it from. So I think that how we can still use the kupu, but maybe it's in Moitiatia, maybe, as I said to you, the 3, the Nicene Creed, the Apostle, those things we should be in us, as far as I'm concerned. But getting back to it, it's the other 6 days. What are we talking about? Job security. What are we talking about? Interest rates and money. What are the things that are affecting, for me, Māori whānau, and why aren't we addressing these things and actually fronting them up? And maybe it doesn't happen on a Sunday. Maybe that happens on a midweek, or we have a lectionary series or something like that. Discipleship is absolutely needed. Induction, becoming part of the whānau is. There will be a dynamic change because, again, from my perspective, we're wanting to become a resourcing church. So we're wanting to actually create this next group of leaders so they can actually go and take the word and plant elsewhere and still have the support back of Te Mihana Māori. So in my role, which is a lot about the finances, you know, my whole kaupapa is how do I support all those places? And how are those people? Because like the Sunday school, we want 3 or 4 teachers, and we've got the money there in the budget to do it, but we've got to find the right people. So we really need to start praying, and I pray that prayer, let your people go, you know. Because I think we need to let the people go, people who might be discovering God or discovering who their identity is, and that God would send them to us. So I just really encourage that whatever we do, we also have that base of prayer, because I don't think, if karakia is not the thing that actually launches us, I just don't know where that foundation would be. I'm very keen to have other services that basically will fit other people. The only final thing I'd like to mention is I think the prophetic. I think somehow we're missing the prophetic. I think Māori in, I'm going to say, what were the ones that could see things? Is it matakiti? And that? It's just that wairuatanga. To me, that it's still there, isn't it? But we're not, I don't know how that gets in the church or how that becomes part of, but I think there is that seeing, there is that knowing, there is that, as it is in heaven, here on earth. Seeing as it should be, and sometimes planting the seed even before we know it. And you would need good governance and spiritual partnerships to make sure that what's being said is correct. But I think somehow I would encourage us to let that be explored as well in the prophetic. Now, I don't know if that's a Sunday thing or if, again, that's a different thing. But I really want to let people grow and have that, sometimes deep to deep. Anyway, kia ora.
Kia ora, just a couple of points to add that kind of like bounce off what's already been spoken about. I think one for me is like thinking about entry points, that like not just putting all of our eggs into the Sunday service being the, oh, come along to that, but like things like when we did the Kahuitane barbecue, it was just like epic just to have a chill space for people to kind of be part of the marae community, but then also kind of see that we're here on Sundays to come back. So I think being intentional, I think there's then opportunities around discipleship that will grow from there. So I think, yeah, to be mindful and to be thinking about that. I think around our sung worship, me, Shona and Koraniti, actually after the service, we're just having a quick yarn about it, and I think figuring out what our sound is here at Te Mihana, I think is a key thing. I think it touches upon what Neihana talked about, even from a kai karakia, speaking in te reo Māori and meaning what they're saying. But I think also in our worship, we need to be doing that too. We need to be embodying that. And I think it's the medium in terms of, we were talking about a few of the Matatini pieces, ones that had Karaitiana origins and really sounded Māori, and others that had Karaitiana origins but just sort of sounded like Māori singing it like Pākehās. And I don't quite know, I'm not musical, so I don't quite know what that is or what that sounds like. But essentially, I guess that really English chorally style. So I think for me, that's like a big part as part of developing our service that I would love to. It's not me at all, so I also am not the person, don't come talk to me about it, but I would love to also be a part of helping figure out what our sound is. Koraniti couldn't make it, but I had a quick yarn to her just as she was leaving to say, can I bring anything on her behalf? And I think she was just talking about resourcing that space as well of, given that there's no guitar here, she has to bring her guitar every week, and if she's bringing a guitar, she knows that she's on. So it's more so, is there, resourcing for that to have a guitar and a guitar here, 2 guitars. So someone can step up if needed to, or 10 guitars if we're all here. Yeah. So I think just resourcing that space, I think praying in people who can bring that sound for us, supporting the likes of Shona and Koraniti. That's sort of another big part of the service that I think needs needs focus, needs prayer, and needs support. So, kia ora.
Kia ora koutou. What I love about this incredibly small group of people is the wealth of experience here. So you have our origins in terms of Uncle Tom and Auntie Ngārangi, and we have the youngest in terms of the younger children who are coming here from those St John's students as well. And all of the knowledge and the intellectual contribution that can be gained, the academic can be gained in all of that is actually massive. And when I think of Jesus and his 12 disciples, well, we've got an easy number to work with right here. When I look at this space and in terms of writing my thesis, we belong to the Church of England. And so it was indigenised from Roman Catholicism to the English Church. And so what you see here right now in terms of our space is English. What we work from in terms of the liturgy is English. We've indigenised the foundations of that for us in Te Reo. When Uncle Matu was here, there was a big cohort who used to come. And so Sunday Karakia followed through all of those other days where there was a whanaungatanga that went on with the Auckland Anglican Māori Club as well. The interesting thing to me is that the Angies have continued next door, they have regenerated, but they don't want to have anything to do with here. And that's been long-standing for a while now. So in my head and heart, I have been trying to reconcile what that is. And when you see something of matatini, as we've all been witness to this week, all of a sudden you start to hear not just the reo, but you hear the sounds that go along with that. And there's something in terms of the music that we have sung in the past that have had an English framework, but have been in te reo. And so transitioning from that through the contemporary and where scripture and song, which actually began here in Aotearoa and went global for the Hillsongs and the like, and every other contemporary music that we hear that is Christian, it started here. So how I'm thinking at the moment, or the way I'm thinking at the moment is, in terms of our being Māori, how do we be Māori in this typically English space? How do we make this space us? We had a couple of African guys come over one time. They were talking about how their people were coming back to church. They're from Africa. And that what caught them was their music, the sound and the rhythms of their music. That's what was bringing them back to church. So as far as I'm concerned, that's also a really important part of who we are. What is our sound as tikanga Māori? What is it today? And that's not necessarily going to come from the likes of me or from the likes of Uncle Tom and Auntie Ngārangi, but you can be sure we will be supporting whatever else is actually in creation. That's what we want to do, and we want to be able to support that as much as we can. As well as this space, what has gone on is the kaitiakitanga of the space. And so we look at that whole example in Jesus when he gets out the towel and washes the disciples' feet. And so it's meant in terms of that kaitiakitanga, caring for the space, making a place of hospitality where the hosting has been prepared for. People haven't just rocked up at the last minute and started to do something where everything's just shoved on the table. It's done well by turning up a long time and beforehand, actually preparation that goes on in the same way as we do our studies, prepare for our preaching, prepare for our kaikarakia roles and the readings, that we do the whole shebang. So what I would like to throw out there actually are questions in terms of what is our sound as Māori? How are we being Māori in this space? When I went to church, there were 5 of us. We sat in the front row of our churches and we'd sit there through long sermons, and there'd be creche and there'd be Sunday school. So I wholeheartedly agree with the fact that we need people to be looking after our tamariki. There are also times when you have to do the things that you don't want to do. I would love to be able to stand up in front of a mic and sing to my heart's content. But because I also like accompaniment, I'm always parked behind the keyboard, when in fact I would rather be the one up front singing in the microphone. So sometimes you have to take that position where you don't want to be there, but it's actually going to support whatever else is going to be on top. So be thinking around those things too. What are the gifts that God has given you? You don't necessarily want to do it, but at this point in time, until we grow the church, what is it that I could do and support? Kia ora.
Kia ora te whānau. If you don't know me, my name is Sean McGinnity. I'm doing the diploma at St. John's Theological College and moved up from Te Puke 3 weeks ago, and I love this church. But my whakaaro come from C3 in Tauranga. What I love in church is I love people, but I love greeting people at the door. And whenever I come to a church or come to a place, when there's unchurched people, people that are new, the first thing they see is someone at the door. Haere mai, come into this place where you feel God. So I felt like, yeah, I'd love to be there and being that person. I've got a 6-year-old that we're just trying to transition him, but he'll get there. But I'm kind of focusing on him at the moment. But yeah, ngā mihi.
Tēnā tātou katoa. Don't like the mic. Oh, thanks. Thanks, Lyndon. Thank you. I don't know, I'm just sitting there listening, and last year we had a big kōrero about growing the church, what that looked like, and yeah, changing this, changing that in the church. Contemporary, traditional, and for me, in my life, we've been traditional Anglicans or Church of England, and then it changed to mihinare, and I had to learn how to spell that too. But yeah, so saying it wrong apparently, and ngare, yeah. So, in terms of the traditional and the karakia was, so we got a little church in Aparahama, just outside of Kaikohe, and see my family there, like front and right side, that's where you go. And then you have the Poes and then the Rogers and then the other whānaus, Waitfords and that, anywhere else in the church, but that was our side. So our grandfather and grandparents would be at the back and all the tamariki in the front, and we had to be within reach of his tokotoko, and especially if he talked. And so we had no choice, it was just, we were brought up like that. And in the time of Aramapau, Aramapau and his karakia, when he used to take the karakia and we weren't allowed to laugh and talk and so that's how I grew up, and then my family went into the ordained priests, and that's the only way I know. I love the singing in the church, always loved the singing, because that was the part of my family, had different like melodies and all sorts when it come to the himines. But I went to a karakia called Good Shepherd in Massey, where I live, and it was they welcomed you like I couldn't, like they welcomed you from the door, and these was like queers. Hello, what's your name? And then I brought my nieces and that to the church, and they had the little colouring ins for them, and would you like them to go to Sunday school? No, it's our first time. Maybe next week we'll come. But they felt, they believed, even the young people, they believed, had that belief that they'll pray over you. And whatever that was, whatever that looked like for you that you were holding, or had a hard week sort of thing. And I come here to karakia to uplift my heart and feed off the kouhou, whatever the kouhou, when I'm listening to Holy Spirit come over me. Sometimes I don't get anything, but that's not because of the person preaching. It's just I don't, the pictures, there's nothing for me until I go into conversations with some people over and have a cup of tea. But other times it gives a great uplift, and I want to share that. Going into my mahi and going into working with families that I work with, so I share it there from here, because it just uplifts me in all my being and what I can do. For me, the minister's always been the leader. If we had problems, when my brothers were naughty, my parents would go to the minister and say, oh, do you have odd jobs for him? Or do you need a driver? Or things like that, eh? And then my brothers would go with the minister. That was their punishment sort of thing from my parents, to drive the minister and dress up again on a Saturday in their church clothes, tie and everything, to drive the minister around Kaikohe, Matarawa. Oh, man. But when the minister calls, I'm saying, when he puts out a call to us, we just go. We don't ask, and then we sort of dress up, take our books or what have you, and then go. It's never been a question or anything like that. We just go, oh, where are we going? Yeah, the minister rang, come on, let's go, get up. Everybody's up, and then we go. Whether it's to make a kai, sandwiches, or whatever the needs to be done for the minister to help him, because you can't do everything in the area. So with the kōrero from Lyndon earlier, with regard to, I guess, tūhono, connecting to the marae and te māhurihuri, and with whatever the need is, or people needing a minister for, house blessing or something, just to go in, make the connections first. Hello, so they see the face, and then introductions sort of thing. So it was just to put my hand up and go and work with for our church to grow our church, the connections. Yeah, if there was a need. So that was where our kōrero was going. Yeah, so I love the singing. I love the way the overhead has the directions in terms of the services and where we're up to. Oh, I love that. I don't get lost anymore. Going, what's this? And we're sitting down. What's that? They're singing again. No. Yeah, it was just, yeah. But they're really great. I love the technology and the social media of the they call technicians, IT, or? Yeah, no, they do. Eruera. Oh, okay. Kia ora, Eruera. Yeah, so I don't have much to say. I just love coming here. I love the balance of having the koe and kaumatua. I won't promise to look at my friend Tommy. And, our whānau with the tamariki. It's just great to hear. Great to hear the little babies. They don't cry when they look at me now. They just smile, and I wave to them. Yeah, and then to the mamas. But no, that's me nō reira. He poto taku kōrero. Kia ora. Yeah, kia ora. Thank you.
Kia ora koutou. Thanks for bringing the mic down for me. Esther just sent me a text because she can see it as well. So she was like, "Oh yeah, make sure you say this and that." So here it is. We love coming here. It's such an awesome experience, and even just with Malachi, we can just be. It's so cool. And even though sometimes we get a bit stressed out, is it too loud or what's going on? But everyone just loves the babies here, so just want to acknowledge that. Just some ideas around families and young families. One idea would be I know when the time got changed from 10 o'clock to 10:30, it was a big deal, but we've got quite a few mates who they're like, man, imagine if a church was at 4 p.m. You start at 4 p.m. and then at 5 o'clock you do kai, and then once that's over, kids straight into bedtime. So that's just an idea. So do what you must with that. But in terms of kids, I think the key thing is when they arrive to this place here, what is the experience that we want them to have when they're 20 years old, when they're 30-year-old and 40-year-olds, when they look back to their childhood into this place, what do we want them to remember about this place? Probably the key thing for us. And also just tautoko what Te Karere and Neihana talked about the liturgy, there's a certain depth to it, which especially as I've kept on learning te reo, sometimes you pick up on metaphors, you're like, oh, that's what it actually means. And it's those moments where I think the penny drops. So there's something deep about a liturgy that the more you dig into it and the layers, it's just heaps of layers, eh? And also with that as well, I think even for Christians, so not just non-Christians, I think that Anglican service is actually quite foreign. Why do we do, the forgiveness bit? What's that about? So, and also, why do we share the peace before we do the Eucharist? So, what I'm thinking around that is if there was a one-liner as we transition to the next bit, so then people in the crowd goes, oh, I know why we're doing this, or we're up to the forgiveness bit and all that stuff. And why is reading scripture important publicly? Is there one liner we can say that's why we do that? So if there was a transition line before you go to the Eucharist. But yeah, and alongside that, at college, we've had the opportunity to have like a narrated Eucharist before. So then where each bit is explained why that's there and why that's good. So like maybe like since like it's even new for Christians who are outside the Anglican faith, like maybe once a month just to explore that like a part of the liturgy in depth. Like why do we sing the Lord's Prayer so often? Just little things like that, because it's quite new to a lot of us. Like I was born in a Baptist background, so yeah, it's just very different. Another one is around like going back to children and stuff. I like kind of key events here. And the thing I want to say about this, man, like I grew up Baptist, and one thing that we were good at was admin. And what I mean by admin is like sending things out early, getting dates locked in the calendar. So for us, like, man, like we would love to turn up to some things, but sometimes the calendar's already there, like it's already full. So if we could work on the admin side, that would be amazing. But also with that, like key celebrations, hey, like for me, like one day, like I really hope that my son can get married to someone. And the idea is that like if someone's having a wedding at this church, like we can just even bring him along so he can actually see what a wedding looks like here, or even a tangi, like if that's there. So then he knows that, you know, for awesome times, but also the hard times, this is where the church gathers. So like, I don't know, being more intentional around those events would be cool. And even if it's just to help out at Tata Hono, like they'll be all good. So they can see what serving looks like. So for me, like my key thing is like, I want to raise my son to be a disciple of Jesus. Yeah, and also this place, like, man, it's got a lot of awesome history. This place here, it was the cutting edge of faith, as we heard from Shona, but also in terms of, you know, what does tikanga Māori look like in this ever-changing world? It was the cutting edge. And with Adam talking about with the being close to the university, this was the cutting edge. So, like, for me, like, it would be awesome to see it kind of pick up on that side of things too. Like, what does it look like to be the cutting edge in those areas too, in those conversations? But yeah, that's a bit from me.
Kia ora tātou. I think one of the things that we need to do is to address the elephant that was in the room that we've not talked about. And that is, with the change that was suggested, there was a great deal of suspicion. We need to talk about that. We've got past that now. However, a lot of that had to do with the miscommunication or no communication between people. So I'm confident that we're actually past that. But it's something that, you know, the truth is going to set you free. And we know that that was an issue because I ended up becoming the conduit between two groups there. But again, praise God, we've actually moved on past that. A lot of the suggestions that have come up today are really relevant. I mean, having people at the door. I've got a real thing about new people coming into the church and there's no one down there to greet them. Especially, mainly new people, and indeed regular people who regularly attend here. There's nothing better than actually seeing a familiar face at the door saying, "Oh, good to see you again. Oh, harama, harama, harama." And the same applies also to those who are new to the church. You know, and we need to get better at that. I'm confident that we will be the leaders in terms of worship at the beacon on the hill here. There are some ideas that'll take me a little bit of time to get to. I mean, I come from a Baptist background as well. I wouldn't go like that. So I wouldn't do that, bro. But let me just in there. You know, I was very lucky. I was very lucky. Baptised a Methodist. Christened a Methodist, baptised a Baptist, and confirmed an Anglican. So I've done the circuit. So for the right place. So you know, I am looking forward to advancing a lot of the ideas and being part of that as we move forward. Some people are calling, oh, watch out, here comes Grumpy. But, you know, when it comes to that area up here, around the high altar and setting all that up, even the wafers and the wine, I take that task very, very seriously. You know, that's really tapu for me. And so if I'm grumpy and say, hey, don't have your first conversation here, get down the back, go down there and talk down there, there's a reason for it. This is not the place to lean on and hold a conversation. So, you know, I don't mean to be grumpy, but... Not that sad about it. No, I'm never sad about that. So anyway, I just wanted to share those points with you. But again, I make the point, and I need to make it again and very, very strongly, that I'm happy to be part of any kōrero that's going to advance. Sorry, just one other point that Lyndon mentioned before is about planting, you know, worship groups out there. I've had a discussion with Lyndon about my own whānau out there in Waiuku, Baptists, who want karakia and have reached out for years and years, saying, Haramai, bring the gospel to us. I'm saying, no, I don't want to come down here, marry too many family down there, I don't want to go down. But the point is that, but the point is this, how many more in our communities are reaching out? I know that in GI for the last 6 years, there's whānau out there that have been reaching out saying, come. They don't want to come here initially, for whatever their reasons. It doesn't matter. Let us respond to the call. Kia ora tātou.
All you Baptist people. You're looking at an Anglican tuturu, right? Born and bred an Anglican. That's right. And I actually didn't like going to church because I was dragged to church because my father was a minister, and I always feel an empathy with the children of clergy, and more especially for their wives, because I honestly think that the church abuses the clergy's wives in terms of looking after them, you know. So I was fortunate to have a good wife, because she decided that she's going to do what I, wanted to do, and I didn't really want to, but I ended up having to come back to look after my father, and as a result, we've sort of progressed from there. So I owe a lot to my dad, and also to the church. And as such, I've come to love this place. Sometimes I've come to appreciate my wife more too, because she loves this place as well. And the commitment that she's made to my father and has been a sacrifice. But it's one of those things that we're sort of committed to. I'm listening to quite a few of your recommendations. I'm very excited about the new changes that you are bringing up, or the new innovative ideas. Like Dave, there are one or two habits that sort of make me cringe a bit, and so I'll just tell you what they are. I'm glad that we now have, we had our karakia go through the month of January. I thought it was very successful. Gave everybody an opportunity to do their thing up there, and they kept within the parameters of the liturgy. Yeah, 746, gee, pretty good. Everybody knows it off by heart now. We don't need the books, we don't need the screens, and yet we're told where we're up to, you know. But the little things like receiving the sacraments. I find that that's a very tapu area. I don't know what the practice is, whether you're giving the sacraments out to children or whatever you like, but I find unless you... no, I'm very conservative. My father would never ever have done that. Would have blessed the child, fine, but never ever given the sacraments out to a child until he's been confirmed or something like that. And I noticed that a lot of these Anglican traditions have been sort of watered down and diluted, so to speak, like the wine, I must say. Yeah, that's another thing. I think we should get back to drinking a bit more. No, but the other thing I miss our sort of practices with singing practices and stuff like this. I think if we're going to grow the church, I think we need to sing something that we all know, not just one or two people know, so we probably need to practice things. I think in terms of the liturgy and the Māori language, the one part of it that I'm really excited about is the Psalms. I see the Psalms tend to lend themselves to Mōteatea, and in that sense, why don't we have our own sort of creative, we just watch Matatini, and they're all different styles. I think it's wonderful that we can, adopt something like that. Instead, so he kata I te ari ki kātuka tāu punaka kia irungi te rangi Māori. Ka apera me tā mi kore roa e. That kind of thing. It's wonderful if we've got good leaders who can do those kind of things. We do a bit with the affirmation of faith, which is different leaders, well, that's good too. So long as you start on the right note, otherwise it's too low. But I'm happy, I'm greatly encouraged by the members we have been having here at our worship, and I think there's opportunities to have extra services. I think that'd be wonderful. I look forward to seeing what you have got going Te Karere with regard to that thing that you mentioned this morning. It sounds very exciting, and I hope and pray that everything works out well for all of us. Thank you. Kia ora.
Kia ora.
There's a connection here also with children's baptism. Like the Baptist would wait till you get to a level of rationale before you can actually call it baptism. But I think there's a connection. Some of your whakaara that you shared in Māori.
So, it's a very, very good question, and it might not be easy to answer in a short space of time, but what I'll do is I'll outline what I believe to be the answer. So in the Anglican Church in Aotearoa, New Zealand and Polynesia at the moment, baptism is regarded as what's called full sacramental initiation. So in other words, once you are baptized, you are welcome to receive communion, whatever age you are at. But nevertheless, for a long time, that was not the practice here. In fact, it wasn't the doctrine here either. So up until, I don't know what the date of change was here in Aotearoa, but I would have said it probably in the 90s sometime, or the 80s, was the point where the doctrine changed. Then you're faced with the problem of how do you ensure that you're only giving the sacrament to those who are baptized, which of course you face with adults as well. So there are many adults who come in who are not baptized, and therefore not, in theory, able to receive. And the practice of the church as a whole has been we don't bar people from receiving communion if they come forward. Now, my personal practice for a long time when I came back to Aotearoa was that I would give a little instruction at the start. I'd say, come forward, all those who are baptised are welcome to receive it. But I would then say, and if you don't want to, then please do this, you can have a blessing. But what I eventually realised is that this is a little bit out of line with the practice of the church here as a whole. So I didn't want to be doing something that seemed different from, for example, what other ministers in our Amorangi, other people in our province as a whole, and even what Bishop Kittle himself is doing. So I thought, well, I'll moderate my practice to fit in with what's normal. I agree with that view that baptism is full sacramental initiation. So for me, I'm not so worried about confirmation. But I would love it if I had more confidence that all the children who were coming forward were baptised. In fact, I never let my children receive communion until they were baptised. Confirmation is important, but the critical thing about confirmation is, to some degree at least, an expressive act that says, I believe this, whereas baptism, in my understanding, and I would say this is the sort of more formal doctrine of the Anglican Church in as much as it exists, is that it's God's action, just as the Eucharist is primarily God's action towards us. So
it's godparents' responsibility to look after those children.
It is the godparents' responsibility, and that's another thing that's often forgotten. The godparents are the only people in a baptism service who must be Christians. There's no requirement that the parents are Christians, but there is a requirement that the godparents are Christians. And I sometimes feel at baptisms that there's a little bit of laxness. Godparents turn up, they've got no idea what's going on. And it makes me pretty wholehearted because they're the ones making the promises. I will bring this child up as a Christian, is the very short version of it. So I'd love to see baptism taken more seriously. I'd love to see more baptisms of children. And then I'd also love to see us take some of those issues around the sacrament. Even though I don't hold quite to the same specifics, I would love to see reception of the sacrament taken very seriously. So perhaps this is a very good point. Maybe I should advertise and say, in a few weeks' time we'll have a baptism service. I can do a few preparation things. In fact, some of us were just discussing how Alpha began as a baptism class. I don't know if you know that, the Alpha course, because a lot of Christian parents or people bringing their children for baptism were not actually really connected to the Christian faith. And so what Holy Trinity Brompton did is they said, it's wonderful you want to have your children baptised. You and your godparents need to come on this 10-week course. And what they said was it's about baptism. Really was like, we don't think you're Christians, and we'd like to introduce you to the Lord Jesus. So a lovely way of doing things. And Adam, sorry.
Question then, when we say baptism, are we saying if you're Baptist like Methodist or other faiths, does that still allow you in the Anglican context then to go?
So as long as it's Trinitarian, the only reason we would re-baptise people is if they were baptised not, because as Jesus says, baptising them in the name of the Father, the Son and the Holy Spirit. That is the only valid baptism, is in the name of the Father, the Son and the Holy Spirit. Therefore we would, of course, re-baptise Ratana because it's non-Trinitarian, or Oneness Pentecostals because, again, it's not in the name of the Trinity. But Catholic, Methodist, Baptist, whatever, they're all Trinitarian, all good. And by the way, Rawiri is your first baptism that counts, not the second one. Yeah. So, we're not allowed to receive the sacrament in the Roman Catholic Church, though some priests and even some bishops will do differently, but they regard our baptism as irregular, and so they won't allow us. But the fact they won't allow us doesn't mean that we have to be reciprocal. We can let them in. So, or at least I think so.
Would that be baptism in full immersion?
With babies, I normally do it not with full immersion because it's a bit complicated. The Russian Orthodox baptise babies in full immersion. I've baptised adults in the Anglican Church full immersion, and that would be my preference with adults. It's a little bit tricky. That font you can see at the back there is not entirely perfectly sized to make that work well. The one thing I'll say about that font, by the way, given that we're talking about baptism, that font is in the right place. People keep putting fonts up the front of church. That's the wrong place. Baptism is how you become part of the church. It's the doorway to the church, so it should be near the door. All right? This is how you become one of God's family, is baptism. Father, Son, Holy Spirit, you're all good. Some other God, not so good. There we go. Oh, I think you could. Now, I must admit, I'm sometimes a little bit vague over Church of England versus New Zealand. I'd have to check how many you can possibly have. Oh, yeah. All godparents, eh? Oh, yeah. Yep. It does seem a bit excessive. The one thing I want with godparents is I want them to have a genuine interest in that child. So if you're godparents to, 15 children, there's more that way around that I'm worried. If you're a godparent and you've promised to bring up 15 different kids in the Christian faith, how can you possibly fulfill the promise that you made before God? Whereas if you've only got 2 or 3 children who you're godparents to, then you have some chance at least of doing it. Even if some people are lax, at least it's theoretically possible. But if you've got too many godchildren, you can't possibly do it. So I treasure the fact that the godparents of my children, when they write to them on their birthdays, they inquire after their spiritual well-being. Like there's variation, but like one of them, they'll every 2-3 months they'll write, how's this child's faith progressing? How can I pray for their spiritual walk with the Lord and things like that? That's what you're meant to do, as godparents. So that's what I'd really like. So I'm really keen to up the ante around baptism, and more so than I am, I guess, to restrict access to the table. But I would like it if people took that very seriously. If I can take that part away from what you were saying, I think to treat the reception of the sacrament as something which is wonderful but serious, that would be really good. And yeah, so there are differences of opinion around confirmation and what it means, but we probably won't go into that particular rabbit hole just now. Te karere. Yeah.
Different groups are all on the same page. Would love to see whether that statement is true. We are on the same page around whether we should be moving ahead. And I would love to hear specifically from you and your vision for the people who will be employed here around how we define contemporary, traditional times, incorporate this stuff. It'd be cool to hear kind of how this conversation has reinforced maybe what you came in here thinking or has changed that. And yeah.
That's awesome. Well, can I tell you a couple of thoughts? Because I've also, in the last few years, I've spent a bit of time where I can, reaching out to different people, not everybody, and that's partly why it's good having a group. I think there's something quite distinctive here at Te Ana Tapu, partly because of its own whakapapa, its place in the city centre as well. So it's not at the moment at least, it's not a parish church in the sense of a group of people who live within walking distance coming to worship here. So to some degree, I think this depends a bit on the missioner, or even on the missioners over the next couple of, say, few years, how that all plays out. Because I think that's something that can only be developed in cooperation with the people. So often the way God speaks to us about what we ought to be doing is God says, hey, look at the people who are already here, and this tells you something about what God wants you to be doing. So I'm just trying to say that this comes with caveats. Nevertheless, the point around Te Reo Māori, particularly amongst the younger crew, every person, I would say, under 50 who's come here in the last year or so that I know of has been attracted because of Te Reo Māori and being able to worship God in Te Reo Māori. Funnily enough, I would say that's different down in Manukau. So there's a different kind of scene going on there where having some Reo Māori is important, but it's not that big a deal. And often I'd say it's because a lot of people there don't speak much Reo Māori. And so when it's all in Māori, or a lot of it, it doesn't actually work. So they want some because they love the language, but there's not the same eagerness to... So, I'm thinking of a couple of people I've spoken to in particular who have come from non-Māori speaking churches. It's incredibly important. So more than the contemporary traditional thing, I actually think that's something that's a little bit more distinctive about the younger people who have ended up here. Now, that is not necessarily, it then interacts in interesting ways with all of the other things that we have tried and are in the middle of trying. So for some of that, I think I've got some things which I think are just sort of straightforward, more practical things that I can try and help tweak in the lead up to a missioner being appointed. And my intention as the Archdeacon is still to work very closely, and also I've been told, that's important in terms of Bishop, around how things go here. I think that there is a traditional form of the karakia that is very important to many people. So having things like the processional, having the robes and so forth. And you'll notice when we've done things like the ordination and commissioning, I brought some of my crew from Manukau. Things like, I could happily live in that world too, by the way. My wife, on the other hand, could not. And so it's interesting, there's differences of that. But to do that really well, to my mind, means that it would be worth investing in that space here to say, how do we lift ourselves in that very traditional setting, which, by the way, already has its own sound, so it's not in the space of having to reinvent itself. There is already that himini sound. And again, I grew up singing those. Some of the tunes are a bit rusty in my head because of the years spent away from it, but that works for me. But it doesn't work for a lot of other people who haven't grown up with it and haven't encountered it. So I'd rather we lifted our game in that. And Shona, I hope you don't mind me mentioning this, but the fact that you've said that you'll support with music into the traditional service, I do think there's another little thing, which I actually wrote down in the notes I was taking. We're a relatively small group of people trying to do quite a lot. So as a city centre church, we probably need the scale of having a congregation of about 200 people so that we can have greeters every week. But the greeters are also the people who are the kai karakia, who are the singers, and so forth. So there's not very many of us. A 4 o'clock service has been immensely successful in many Anglican churches I know. You do a family service, pretty relaxed kind of style and setup. Kids are in normally the whole time, and you structure the service to work around them, have a kai afterwards, they go off to bed, the parents are happy because somebody else cooked the tea, basically. Or even my brother's Anglican church down in Christchurch, I think they all bring a plate or something like that. My wife and I are involved in a service like that. And often an evening service works well in an Anglican space, and you do more prayer and praise worship, that kind of thing. So the old school Anglican way of doing that was called evensong, and it was singing, reading of scripture, maybe a sermon, but not necessarily. Used to happen here. It used to happen a lot of places. There we go. So a lot of these things, they're not actually completely new, and they're certainly not non-Anglican. These are Anglican things. Funnily enough, we're God's people trying to do a participation in God's work. The forms of it end up looking pretty similar after a while, so there's not really anything super new under the sun. But I think when I saw the ordination service, and I saw, Wilson, I think there was a lot of people you knew from Takiura coming in, I thought that was really interesting. I'd love to know what their experience of that service was. I think that would be really interesting. If we were trying to really think hard about what's going to work, I think we have to have a strong traditional karakia here, and I almost think the timing on it is a barrier to that, because 8:30 is too early for some people. So again, there's nothing new under the sun. The normal Anglican way of making this work is you do a 9 o'clock and an 11 o'clock. And the 9 o'clock is more traditional, and the 11 o'clock reaches a slightly different group of people. That's a pretty typical way of doing it. We could think about that, but I'm not trying to make a decision about that today. I would love to know what would mean that some of those Takiura people were interested in coming back into the space. I would imagine, given they've been at Takiura, Te Reo Māori is probably quite important to them. And yeah, go for it. Yep.
Because even before also, we were bringing guys from Takiura too.
Yes.
And so what we're already is organically happening is trying to create a service, because that was just, and actually a few of our people did come from Takiura, but that played a big part in how we would like the service to be a bit more inviting. So
yeah, kia ora.
That stuff still
That's
but
awesome.
it does play a big part in terms of the decisions, and that's for people that may not come to the 10:30 service, is that actually like a lot of it is why subtle changes that we're making is based on some of the feedback we get from students. cool to hear what those guys say too.
Yep. Well, let's keep. I think one of the things is then to codify that and to figure out whether we want to, because there's always going to be a challenge for somebody outside the church coming into the church as well. So we have to figure out whether it's a good challenge or a barrier that ought not to be there. Taking on board the fact that we're a relatively small crew, I just want to mention one other thing which came up from what Rosemary was saying too, in terms of things like tangihanga. I think if we want to reach the Māori community, we have to be involved in the Māori world, and that means for those kaupapa Māori that happen, we have to show up. And of course that comes at a massive cost. It does for me. You've been out at that tangi for Troy's family. I saw the ETA on it when it said 1 hour 40 drive, and yep. Oh, and your expense report still to come for the mileage. And so what I mean though is being there for those things. So if there's a good way for me to put the call out when there's a tangi, it's really important that we have people who are willing to show up. Because that's the other thing that's common in churches. All of us have ideas that and this is not the case in this room, okay? I'm not saying that about here. But it's very easy for it to be, I've got these ideas for somebody else to do. So one of the things is, here's the idea that we can all do. And so when Te Mahuruhure says there's a, when John and Christine give us a call and say, then we'll be there. And
I think as we were talking, we were thinking about what is unique to us.
Yep.
And the potential that, maybe we need to be a bit more intentional on what that looks like and the training and development that goes into that.
Yep.
Because, what separates us from other churches that could be really exciting is if you had, these types of events that are happening, and you have, also in Te Karere and Neihana, some of our wahine that are equipped, that know exactly what their role is to go into these whānau, and in some ways that could be our evangelistic.
Exactly.
So
yep.
Yeah, that's cool. I really like hearing this stuff.
Kia ora tū. And hopefully, and if, by the way, if you're not getting that in terms of what is on offer at over at St. John's, Te Hira is your go-to person to say, make it so that I'm confident when I go and do the tangi that I'm going to be doing it the right way, and I'm going to go takahi whare or whatever, that's all equipped. And of course the best way to do that is you go along with somebody else who's comfortable. First time round you go and listen, second time round you'll be doing it with somebody else there, and then after that you're on your own. That's pretty much the way of it, eh? So, and so we've got Te Karere, yeah.
Just to clarify your thinking, I can hear that you're coming back to that position where the two services that we have at the moment are too close together to be distinctive really from one another. And so you want to potentially turn up the traditional sites that is done to a high standard, and then fill the other service, whether that's a different time or not, with quite a different feel. But you are open to what that feel might look like and reframing what contemporary might look like to actually just being more Māori a question. Could you imagine that looking like a new liturgy that is like a whānau focus, so lots of waiata, still holds the major elements, but is new? Or is there another form that you imagine something like that taking that already exists?
So I think, to be honest, I think it could be done within the form that's already there in a sense. And that's one of the video I was talking a little bit there about what's the shape, what's the story that the liturgy is telling. And almost every element of that can be done anew. In terms, as Matua Tom was saying, the psalm could be more tiatia. There's a lot of opportunity for that, but it could also be very different. To my mind, it's not so much that what we're doing in the 1030 is completely needs necessarily to be transformed. I think we should be open to it doing so. And I think the stronger our traditional karakia is, in a sense, the more it gives us the freedom to try that. So as long as we have a very strong offering already for those people for whom that's the place that they love to sit and dwell in, and we're not abandoning the flock that's already there, then I think there's opportunity to experiment more. I think it is a little bit chicken and egg, because to some degree you need a few more people to make the experimentation possible. The best place to experiment is even in a separate one, because then you don't lose people as you experiment. So people love consistency in church, even when they say they don't. What they love is consistent excellence. So people will actually often go to a church that's in a style they don't like, as long as it's done to a high standard. And I can't remember if it was you or Neihana I think it was you, making the point the liturgy means that the more experimental stuff tends towards te reo Pākehā and tends to lose some of the depth that's there in the liturgy. So the way to do that kind of experimental stuff well is to do it with the same depth that's gone in. And that means a long build into it and a careful build. That is in tension with trying to experiment well, and that's why often larger churches have a more experimental service space as well. All I'll say is there's a limit to how much worth there is in experimenting too much with the service. I would say the biggest call on our energy, as Adam was saying, is the other 6 days. It's our mission activity. The more the Māori community see that we are their servants, that's when there's an openness to the gospel. And what that means is when there's something on, we're there. And that's the bit that we transformative. And the way you make that happen is we get people into stipendiary ministry. Or at least that's part of it.
So does 499.
Yes.
So does 456.
Yep.
Like the first recommended one was the 456, but because the Pākehā told them to do 456, they said, "Nah, we're doing 476." But in fact, 456 probably is more of a Māori. That's how Bishop George tells it. And 499, of course, is done from Māori Marsden's perception. So those. I don't think we're ever looking to change the liturgy, but it's actually, does it, because you look at this right now, we've got these pews, right? We're observers, we're not participants. And so these pews originally came in because it was a way to raise revenue. That was actually why pews came into church. Back in the day, we were pews. So a lot of the purpose for this originally, and this is the Catholic tradition as well, was about money, because then the preachers started preaching longer and stuff like that, so they needed pews to sit down. So in some respects, if we can participate, like I know when we've done the big services, like when we've had our 50th celebration, Tom was talking about it would be like a person calling and the congregation responding and calling and responding. So it has a natural te ao feel about it. So I think we're not talking about changing even the liturgies necessarily, more than we're saying, well, how do we incorporate the Nicene Creed or the Apostle? What are these other good prayers that actually could be part of? But if you're all happy and thumbs up for Neihana saying, don't muck around with that second part, which is the communion part. If that's what we're always going to do, that's what we're always going to do. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, and I suppose the only thing I'd want to add to that is I think there is an openness to writing new liturgical elements to it as well, and I know that Bishop Kittle's happy with that, as long as we go through him on it. So that's the only thing we have to be mindful of there, and also remembering that this is in fact his specialty, right? This is what he's a liturgist and a liturgical theologian. So to reach his standard will be an exacting one, but that's good because that's how we don't lose the depth. So yeah, I'm just wondering. We've probably reached a point where it's helpful to wrap things up, unless there's anything that people feel is a burning additional point to add. I think there are some practical things that are straightforward to work on, so I don't think those are things that need to be sort of brought for decision. And then I would say my instinct is that I have some ideas around how we can build into the traditional space, and I think my instinct is that for the next little while, until Easter at least, it's helpful to just iterate and do better and better. I don't want to lose that point about the prophetic though. And I just want to emphasize that the place where I'd love to see that finding a home in our service is after the affirmation of faith, during that space there where the whole point of that is that this is meant to be responsive to God. And so that can be in terms of prayers and intercessions. It can also be in terms of people sharing a word. What's that?
The coho, especially too after you'd done your coho a couple of weeks ago, I really felt, and I was the kaikarakia and I blew it because I didn't listen to what I should have done. I wanted to stop them, and I actually thought we could have I wanted to do the confession again, because I felt that your koho led to a place where actually moving into te tikanga whakapono was inappropriate. There was this big pause that needed to happen. I didn't do it. I was a bit disobedient at that point. But I sometimes, is there scope to do things like that? Because I often sometimes feel it and then I go, oh, has it been done before? I don't know. And I second guess myself. And so I didn't do it then. But that's often a space too, is between the end of the koho, because that's often profound and should be sometimes poking people, and before we do the tikanga whakapono, to be able to, again, there could be a word that comes out.
I think this is where the guide rails of the liturgy are so helpful, though, because they help us, when we have that instinct to do that, it can actually help us to guard against that in a way that's, we're not actually forgiven at that point. Whereas the whole point of it happening early in the service is to say to everyone who's there, my sins have been confessed now and I am forgiven. So to return to that, in a sense, risks losing the assurance that you've been given at that point. So
I would disagree and say sometimes the koho just touches something and it isn't, you could have done your confession case of play, something different. And that was what I felt was something different. Something had moved somewhere.
So then the appropriate way to do it is still to confess our faith, because again, this is a point. A lot of the way the liturgy is structured is not so much about how I feel, but what's a right ordering to our interaction with God that forms us. And so I would say that the appropriate way to approach that is to just hold on to that through the confession of faith, and then to bring it out in that time of response. And absolutely at that point, if you feel under the conviction of doing that, that's the appropriate place to do it, but not to disorder things would be my encouragement.
When you're doing that and you get this leading, and it's like, where does it fit? What do I do with it? And then by the time you actually get to the end, actually it's gone. And you can't go back just because, you know.
So I think this is a really critical point. So I think it's worth taking a bit of time over. So how do we hear the Spirit speaking to us? And we hear the Spirit most clearly through the voice of the church. And I would always want to make sure that we recognise that there's a subsidiarity to hearing other promptings in there as well. And I would really encourage you to develop the discipline of being able to carry that through in a way that doesn't disrupt the ordering there too much. Now, there may well be occasions when it has to be done, but I would say those would be exceptionally rare. And I'd really want to say, let's build the spiritual discipline of responding to God it's like a trellis. You want the vine to grow. If there's no trellis, the vine's going to fall over eventually. Right? Vines can go a little way by themselves. So we want to make sure the trellis is still there. At the moment, though, I would say a lot of the time in our services, we have more trellis than vine. And so I don't want to stifle what you're talking about there, but I want to see it happening as much as possible within the trellis that will give it life. And there is a lot of experience in the Anglican world of doing this. It's just not very much experience of doing it in Te Hāhi Mihingari. So one way that we could look at this is we could look at the experiences and practices of our sisters and brothers around the Anglican Communion, because I do take your point, Shona. In some ways, we've translated an English liturgy. The only thing is that the liturgy is actually much, much older than the English language even. It goes back to the very earliest church, and so one of the reasons the words have depth and we want to preserve them is we're standing in partnership by doing that with all of our spiritual tupuna going back 2,000 years. So there's a guy called Chesterton who said that tradition ought not to have all the votes, but it ought to have some of them. And so at the moment, probably it feels like the tradition's got all of the votes. But I guess I just want to urge finding a way to channel that in the way that I'm suggesting.
Well, all I can suggest then is if you were to do, I love your little YouTube, I watch them, your YouTubey thing.
Oh yes.
Do you want to do a YouTubey thingy on just what you've been talking about? Because I don't understand that. No, I understand the liturgy.
Yes.
But when you talk about, so I understand a skeleton, but I don't understand the ligaments that join the muscle to the skeleton.
Yes.
And you're talking about not cutting those ligaments Otherwise, the muscles might do something a little bit spastic over here. So,
Yes.
but I don't understand that.
Yes.
So I would appreciate some teaching around that. Can I just make one comment?
Go for it.
Oh, Nehana, I heard your bit about the robes. You know, when I was deacon, before I was ordained, Reverend Kerry rang me and he said, "Oh, Debs, I want to make an appointment to meet you down at Church Stores to buy your alb." My heart sank, and I said, "No." I said, "Really?" I said, "Do I have to wear that?" He said, "Yes, I'll see you there." And God, afterwards though, God said to me, "Wow, Deb, that was very interesting. What was that little stamp your foot tantrum you just had there in that moment?" And I said, "I think it's an ugly white sack. I do not like it. I do not want to wear it." And God said, "Kate Pai." He said, "But where are you?" I said, "I'm in the Anglican Church." He said, "Yes." "And why are you there?" I said, "Because you've called me there." He said, "So you know that there are going to be some things," going back to Shona's comment, "some things that you just have to submit to that you don't like." I said, "Yes." So anyway, he said to me, "So will you wear the alb?" I said, "Yes." Afterwards, he said to me, "But do you know why I want you to wear the alb?" "Just me?" I said, "No." He said, "Because, Deb, your role as the Kaikarakia is to create the channel for me to speak to my people and my people to speak to me. When you wear your colours, you distract people. And then it's a distraction. I need you to become invisible. You're there just to help these flows." So I haven't been wearing my alb to your 10:30, but the Lord, that keeps coming back to me. So I will be wearing my albs when I have to do anything for 10:30. But that would be the reason why I would wear my albs. And I can't, for me, just put them aside. So just
that's Aggie Smith.
Pardon?
You. I'm just
Aggie Smith. Aggie Smith. Well, she was the Holy Spirit with her.
There we go. It was through Aggie Smith.
Telling me about my colours and. But anyway, but that was really why I wear my robes, is for that, just so that you understand in part why I wear my robes.
Yeah. Though, of course,
Hold on. I want to respond.
Come on.
I'm not going to be fully accepting, but particularly around the words of submission. I have a mouth and I must use it. I like wearing the robes. I really do. But it depends on the context in which I use it. There are places where the robes have helped me, particularly for my own people, because it's given a particular ordering. It's helped me to do my job really well. Here, ordination, the more traditional services, I'm like, yo, let's go. Because what I'm actually wearing, this is like so terrible to be standing in the front. So in a way, it does make me invisible, and there is some form of comfort, especially for me. But for the 10:30, and I know there are people that are coming in that are of the generation between 20 to about 35, there is a way in which my attire is a barrier. And so when I talk about the influence that I have where I speak and don't speak, what I try to do to show my utmost manaki is to remove all barriers of whether I choose to speak or whether I don't. So I think where I'll stand here is I can meet you in the common ground where there are particular contexts that yearn for wearing robes, and I'm with you. For the 10:30, I still stand my ground and disagree.
Okay, fine.
I believe collars in, robes out. But that's me, Nani. It's okay. At least I'm not Ngāti Whātua going against Taini.
Wow, that's opened up a whole new area of good world there.
Remember, we're streaming live.
Uri tēnei o Ngāti... No te waipanamu ahau, so I'm going to all of those debates. Yeah, one of the things we have to figure out though is we do have to be consistent in whichever karakia we are in. And so I think Paul's words are good. I will be all things to all people that I may win some. And so collectively, and of course one thing that's very Anglican, the way we express that in the Anglican Church is that there is a hierarchy that decides how that works, and then that'll be the way that we can order our different settings around that. So, yeah, I think that's good. There's real divergence in Anglican practice as well, by the way, so it's not simply an Anglican thing. And I will also point out, seeing as we've gone down this rabbit hole a little bit, the robes that we wear here, realistically not actually strictly speaking Anglican, you know, they're modern Catholic. So, you know, if we're going to get into the weeds on this, it's quite tricky. So we're into some quite tricky territory around what is the real tikanga if we want to be real Anglicans. So, but what I'll do, let's leave that there for the moment, and we'll work all of that through. Ka pai. Well, kia ora tātou, tēnā koutou, ngā mihi nui ki a koutou mō o koutou kōrero, tētahi ki tētahi, o koutou whakaro, whakaro pai, whakaro nui, I runga I te kaupapa o tō tātou karakia, I rā tapu, I rā. Tēnā koutou katoa. Perhaps if I can finish up just by praying, and in fact, given the conversation and so forth, let's just say shall we say the grace together? Kia tau, kia tātou katoa, te ata whai o tō tātou ariki o ihu karaiti, me te aroha o te atua, me te whiwhi ngā tahitanga ki te wairua tapu, ake, ake ake, āmene. Ka pai. Most of you ever done in a day is 5 services, so you know, I'm sure